thanks for peeping the vid. So, there's been some controversy on the ending of 16, so I'm here to hopefully clear up a few things. Most of everything is told to you through the story, but there is a bit that you need to research on your own through the active time lore to get a better understanding of what's happening and even learn some of the stuff that the game doesn't tell you. So I'll start off with Ultima's goals, since that's kind of the starting point of where the story, begins to wrap up. So it's told us that the Blight is, it's a bad thing, right? It's the entire purpose for why we're destroying the mother crystals. It's because of the Blight. But the Blight is caused by magic, okay? So every time a crystal is used, or every time a bearer or dominant uses magic, they are further progressing the Blight. Now, Ultima is an alien. I know. Ultima is an alien who came from a different world where it was, it was super advanced, highly technological, all of that. And his race was basically wiped out by the Blight because they overused magic. So 16 of them got on their ship, Origin, as a sort of arc, and they flew off, I guess, and landed in Valisthea. That is the Origin, is the crystal that you go into with Dion and Joshua at the very end there. That is their ship. And that is where they've been sleeping for eons, waiting for the plan to come to fruition, basically. Now, one Ultima stayed awake. He went and he created, or one of the first things he did was create the Tower Reverie, which is where you fought Odin. And from there, he picked out on the continents where to put the mother crystals. And these mother crystals were used to siphon the ether from the land. After that, he created humans. And he created humans in order to create a vessel that was strong enough to hold his power and cast rays, because he was incapable of doing so in his the game calls it his incorporeal form. So he needed a corporeal, or a physical form, in order to cast this huge spell. So Clive, as we know, is the vessel for this, Mythos. And basically, after he would have casted rays, the body would just have become stone. It would just been defunct. Its entire sole purpose was to cast rays in order to create a new world that doesn't have the Blight for Ultima and the couple of brethren he has left to live. Now, mind you, the Ultima are they're like a hive mind. They're like a collective conscious. So what one does, all of them basically do. They all think and feel the same way in this. Now, there is a hypocrisy in this plan, because Ultima's goal, right, is to create a new world where he's going to restart again. But magic requires ether, and ether is like the building block fundamental of life. So even though, he might have a fresh world to start with, that world would also end up getting blighted, and he would have to go through the process all over again at some point. Though the world would be fresh versus the current world that we play in that has been blighted by the humans over the however long millennia that the Ultimas have been asleep. After defeating Ultima, Clive takes his power and uses it to break this cycle. He uses these new, basically godly powers to get rid of magic, crystals, icons, all of it. He essentially creates a world where, it's like 15th century medieval Europe. We're talking the most normie of norms here. We are no longer in Final Fantasy. We are in ancient Britain, effectively. And when while he has this power, he does heal Joshua, But his goal isn't to bring Joshua back to life. I should note that. He's simply just mending Joshua's wounds while he still can. Now, after casting this huge spell, he basically used everything he had to send out this one final giant fiery spell in order to co-sign all of it to the flames, as he says.
Bearers, dominance, crystals, magic, consigned to the flames. Even if it means the end of me. These are our terms.
He washes up on the beach and he tries to use magic, probably the last little bit he has, that just taps even more into his absolutely dwindling pool of ether, and it causes his hand to instantly start to turn to stone. So the implication here is that Clive succeeded in his goal of removing magic from the world, effectively breaking the cycle of not only the blight, but also the discrimination against bearers, which was like, it was a big motivating factor for Clive and Sid to help save these oppressed people, to give them the freedom that they deserve, human rights and all that. We kind of enter a Schrodinger's Clive kind of situation here, because it does cut off after we see his hand start to turn to stone, as he looks up into the sky and he looks at media. So the audience is left wondering, well, did Clive die? Because the implication kind of reads like that, or is something else going on here? And from how it looks to me, based on a whole lot of things throughout the game, it does seem like he's alive after that. Starting off, Jill prayed to media for Clive's return, back when she was a kid, right? And media starts to flicker, which might be a callback to when she made that prayer. Initially, it flickers out, so Jill might be under the assumption that Clive's not coming back, which is why she immediately starts crying and she runs off. But when she runs out onto the deck in the hideaway and she's looking out into the ocean, the dawn starts to rise. Okay? And for like a few seconds, it kind of looks like she's smiling as the sun is rising. Now, during her side quest at the very end, she notes that no matter how terrible the night, dawn always comes, and that Clive always comes back for her, right? So there's symbolism there in that the dawn is representing Clive coming back to her.
What?
I slipped away from my governess to climb the tor. And from there I saw a sea of petals, all reaching for the sun. And I realized that no matter how terrible the night, dawn would always come. That you would always come for me. And you have. Again and again.
Which would also play a part in his whole self-sacrifice motif that is shown throughout the game, that he is like a shield and that his purpose is to merely protect everyone, and he never looks out for himself. this would show that he did like not do, he didn't expend every single ounce of ether in his body, and he had just enough to stay alive basically and come back to her, which was what she wanted. In a side quest with Harpocrates, Clive says that he might take up the pen instead of the sword and begin writing, which would make sense now because, if his hand just turned to stone, then he'd be like a one-armed swordsman, which, I mean, maybe you could do, but a one-armed swordsman with no magic, looking at a bit of a handicap there, right? So the implication of that cutscene and Harpocrates giving him the quill is that Clive is now going to become a writer. He is going to write down the tales of what happened during this huge quest in order to destroy the mother crystals and help mankind.
When it comes to expressing one's gratitude, I find that words are seldom sufficient. Here.
What's this?
A stolas quill. Or more precisely, my stolas quill. 'Tis said that an owl's feathers are steeped in the wishes it hears over its long lifetime. All those words just waiting to pour out onto the page. So consider this my wish for you. That one day you may put down your sword and pick up that pen.
Well, when that day comes, I'll certainly have a lot to write about. Thank you, Harpocrates. It shall have pride of place in my chamber.
At the very end, post-credits, we get a little snippet, a little scene that shows that icons and magic, these are just myths. They're just fairy tales that have been passed down over time, and that Clive did succeed in removing magic from the world. The world is now flourishing based on, the little bit we see outside of the house that it takes place in. We see flowers and we see butterflies, and it's a very idyllic little cottagecore space, right? But we see just a little later, the scene's not too long, but we see just a little later on the table the book titled Final Fantasy, written by Joshua Rosfield. Now, how could it be Joshua Rosfield? Joshua's dead, right? Knowing Clive and how he likes to take the name of people, chances are he took the name of Joshua in order to keep his brother's name alive, and he took up the pen, like Harpocrates suggested, and he wrote this story. And it's kind of funny, and this may be a little bit of a reach, but it is kind of funny, because one of his final lines against Ultima is like, "This will be your Final Fantasy." It's very, oh, he said the name of the game kind of moment.
The early fantasy here is yours, and we shall be its final witness.
So there is that, which could tie into the name of Final Fantasy for the book. And then after that, if you recall, or you could try it right now, if you go and you start a new game and you don't skip past the Phoenix Gate, Clive is narrating the story. And this is the only time that Clive narrates the story, because the game ends with like a cliffhanger, like a ... So if you roll it back and you see Clive talking in the past tense of the events to come, it's like, oh, okay. So that adds further credence to Clive lived, took on the name Joshua, and he wrote this book. And if you're thinking that, well, what if it's Joshua? Maybe he did bring Joshua back. The Phoenix can't bring back the dead. And in a scene in Sid's grave, when Clive and Gav and all of them, they reconvene before they go off to do whatever, to talk about Sid, Clive says the Phoenix can't bring back the dead. And he talks about how important it is to live while you still have the chance to live. And I think Joshua says this at some point, but I can't remember. Or I couldn't find any evidence that he did because it's a very big game, but I could have sworn that he does say that at some point.
But I will say this, old friend. Hugo Kuka is gone. His shadow looms over us no longer.
It's a pity the Phoenix can't be in two places at once. If he'd have been with us, maybe he could have done something for the lost.
Not even the Phoenix can bring people back from the dead. Life has a beginning and an end. So we must live while we have the chance. And not as slaves to the crystals, but as free men.
And yeah, I mean, that's about all there is to it. There might be more to suggest that he lived. I mean, you could believe that he died. Like I said, the ending is fairly ambiguous, but it is heavily implied that he is alive and he's with Jill and Torgal back in the hideaway, you know, doing his thing. That's about it. Hopefully, maybe this might have cleared some things up for you. If you disagree with me, I mean, that's okay too. Like I said, ambiguous, all that. But this is what I believe. This is what I think the writers had in mind when they were creating this ending. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks.
It was Moss the Chronicler who said that the land of Valisthea is blessed in the light of the Mother Crystals, and that it was this light which finally led our forebears out of the darkness. Yet, what they saw in the light gave rise to temptation. Temptation that ever lures us back into the crystal shadow. And thus did our journey begin.